Welcome to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm your host, Patrick Norris. We're going to grow your leadership through neuroscience, psychology, and theology. Hi, everybody. Welcome to episode number 39 of the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. My name is Patrick Norris, and our goal today is to help you lead with a whole heart, a healthy brain, and a soul on fire. I'm so glad you're with us. Today, we are in episode number 39 with my friend Joyce Hill. She served in multiple Fortune 500 companies as their organizational director. Her career has taken her into the C-suites of Sprint Telecommunications, State Street, H&R Block, and Chrysler Financial. After years in the marketplace, she took her experience and expertise into the classroom as an adjunct university professor. Our conversation today is titled A Crash Course in Emotional Intelligence and Feedback. This is part 2 of 2. Go back to August 27th's episode number 35 for part 1. In today's episode, we talk through what emotional intelligence is and its 4 domains of self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, and relationship management. We talk about the benefits of developing it as a leader and the cost if we don't develop it. We share how hard skills like technical abilities, specialized knowledge, administrative expertise, etc. are great, but soft skills like communication, teamwork, adaptability will actually multiply your success. Joyce teaches us how to develop our emotional intelligence muscles and how to know we are growing. Our conversation goes to that we as leaders coaching others, leading them in their own improvement around emotional intelligence. This is a must for all people desiring to grow or to change the culture of their organizations or even leading in their homes. You're going to really enjoy this inspiring, insightful, and energizing show. But first, if this podcast is adding value to your leadership in life, I'd like to ask you to subscribe to the podcast, like it, and comment in the reviews at iTunes. Also, help us get the word out by sharing on your social media platforms. Thank you for doing that. Go to RedInkRevival.com and check out everything that we're up to. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post, as well as all our upcoming events, from Zoom processing groups to psychoeducation events. Be sure to check it all out. Let's go now to this week's episode number 39 with Joyce Hill as we take a crash course in emotional intelligence and feedback, part 2 of 2. Welcome everybody to the Red Ink Revival Leadership Podcast. I'm so excited to have with me part 2 with Joyce Hill. Joyce, as you know, has been the organizational director in C-suites of Fortune 500 companies like Sprint Telecommunications, State Street, H&R Block, and Chrysler Financial. She has trained executives in things like multi-tier feedback, change management, cultural transformation, talent development, succession planning, team interventions, performance management, retention strategies, employment engagement, and personal development plans.
I'm exhausted just hearing that.
I know. 12 years you have served as an adjunct professor at universities, including Avila universities. You facilitate a lot of courses, and they're all under the umbrella of the Masters of Science in Organizational Development. And you serve on the board of counselors of Avila University. Joyce, thank you again for hopping back with me for part 2 on emotional intelligence.
I am so excited to continue this conversation. I know we got into a lot of pieces of emotional intelligence in the first part, so I'm really looking forward to dig deeper into some of the segments of emotional intelligence today.
Oh my gosh, me too. Well, let's go into the review. First of all, you went into 4 domains of emotional intelligence, and tell us again what those 4 domains are.
Yeah, the first one is self-awareness. And that's emotional self-awareness. So that's a key piece because we're talking about emotions here. Emotional self-awareness, self-management, when the key piece there is that self-control. So being able to put that impulsivity in check, if you will. The third, the third one is social awareness. And that's where empathy falls into play, as well as organizational awareness. And then the final one is relationship management. So being able to use all of those skills that we've been developing under social awareness, self-management, and under social awareness to be able to really create and maintain strong relationships.
Last time we went over where to begin in emotional intelligence. And you mentioned that the first thing you do is you catalyze a podcast like this. Maybe you buy a book. You mentioned Daniel Goleman and emotional intelligence last podcast. Maybe grab a book or, watch a video. You start with just knowing what it is. Right. And then you said, secondly, you move into feedback. You begin to invite mentors into your life. We spent a good deal of time talking about how to find the person or how to go about getting feedback from certain individuals and what that feedback would look like and how to actually give others feedback. So that kind of catches us up. Let's jump now into the benefits. What are the benefits that we actually experience when we develop or strengthen our emotional intelligence?
Well, I think one of the first things you experience is just a new sense of you.
Oh.
Because you have taken the time to get in touch with those emotions. We experience them, they're a part of us, but a lot of times we don't know why they're happening, or we don't know what to do when they are happening. So it really puts you more in tune with you, with yourself. The other thing I think that comes from emotional intelligence is better relationships. Because again, once again, if we're coming as our best self that we can put in front of others, if we're coming with our best self that we can bring to a relationship, that relationship has a wonderful start to it.
Yeah.
And you're going to be able to build better relationships. But those relationships are both professionally, personal. It doesn't matter. It's wherever you have that opportunity to create a relationship. So this isn't just all about work. So yeah. it wraps over into our family lives and everything that has to do with relationships. And what's interesting, it also improves our own mental and physical health.
Oh, come on. Talk about it.
Yeah, this is what's amazing. There is actually studies that show that when we are able to, if you will, manage our anxieties and manage our emotions that we're dealing with, that people have a tendency to have better cardiovascular functions.
Yes.
Their stress levels are lower, and when you can maintain a lower stress level or sometimes even eliminate them, stress is hard on the body. That's a big positive there. So emotional intelligence actually has a great connection to our mental and our physical health.
It's so amazing that it is. God created our bodies and he called it wonderfully and fearfully made. Yeah. He made us in ways that is so interesting when we, as a Christian, from a Christian worldview, as we embrace the scripture and activate it in our lives, it's all a manual for us to have mental health and emotional health that then creates for us biological, physical health.
And you know what? And I believe that God wants us to live our best life, that we were meant to live our best life, through him, for him, and for others on this earth. And if we care about others, if we take care of others' needs, you know what happens?
Yeah.
Our needs get met.
Oh, come on. So true.
But what we typically say is, okay, what do I need today? What do I need you to do for me today? What, me. But we need to flip that. And emotional intelligence causes us to do that. It causes us to flip and say, okay, I know I'm bringing my best self to the table. So I need to see, what are your needs? How can I meet your needs? And when I meet your needs, my needs are going to be met.
Yeah. It just sounds on the surface as being real fluffy. And yet, on the other hand, it is fundamental to the way God designed us to function. Yes. The old Greek philosophers, they would use the word hedon, which is where we get hedonism, to talk about that you're the end client, you're the end user of happiness, that the goal of life is to get you happy. And yet what we find in research and in neuroscience, et cetera, today is that whenever you, and in fact, even the Greek philosophers learned this, they write about it, that when you give your life away, when your purpose is to make somebody else's life better, that it actually gives you a quality of life, a quality of physical health, a quality of mental health that you can't get otherwise. And
so true.
And it's quite interesting.
And I think that's why I do some of what I do today. I think that's why I teach. I think that's why I lead grief groups. I think that's why I coach and mentor individuals, is because I want them to experience some of what I've experienced, and I don't need to hold on to it.
Yeah.
Besides, first of all, I don't own it, you know, so I need to give it away because I want others to experience the same thing.
And I'm going to give a shameless plug for all the pastors out there leading churches, that when we get our people into a serving role in the church, where they show up consistently when it's inconvenient, uncomfortable, undesirable, but they show up on the time that they're scheduled, they serve and give their life away. Because there's times that people in our volunteer teams will say, I was so not in the mood this morning, and the only reason I came is I was scheduled. Right. But if we can move them towards giving their life away, which interestingly enough, the Church of Jesus Christ is designed so that a person can move out of this, I'm the focal point of happiness, to I'm giving my life away, and then I multiply happiness in kind of a reciprocal manner. It's really an amazing thing. So I do give a plug. If anybody who's listening now is not involved in a local church and not involved in volunteering, you're ripping yourself off from the neurochemical privilege of pleasure. That it doesn't feel like pleasure when you're doing it.
No.
It is the consistent, ongoing pattern of giving your life away. So you got to aggregate over months, but because sometimes in the moment you're like, I'm not in a good mood. I didn't even get coffee this morning. But if you continue to do it, it will light up the pleasure centers of your brain for multiple reasons.
That's right.
So I do think that's amazing. Something you said that I want to come back to is you use the phrase bringing your best self. Do you want to bring your best self? And I simply, and I know you fully agree with this, but because when we talk about bringing your best self, there are folks who would assume what that means is that you put on your best face. And what you and I know is that the very topic we're dealing with is developing through work and exercise, practice. You're developing the emotional intelligent muscles. And as you are, it is presenting your best self. So you cannot short circuit or some way do a workaround and say, I'm not going to do the work on myself, but I'm going to just in moments of high stress, high opportunity, I'm just going to present my best self. Well, it's too late.
That's right.
At that point, you needed to have had the days, weeks, months, and years of training so that you are your best self without trying to be your best self.
Well, thank you so much for raising that point, because that is an extremely important point, especially to talk about around leadership, because many leaders, not all leaders, maybe let me back that up and say some leaders believe that putting on that facade, bringing that best self, being in the best suit or whatever they have, and having the nice briefcase and the nice office and the whatever, right, and the prestige, the title and whatever, that will eventually fall apart.
Absolutely.
And what I mean by that is that if you haven't done that work internally, if you haven't increased your self-awareness, understood and been able to create self-management within yourself, when you are, I don't care who you are as a leader, and I have seen this happen to leaders in the C-suite, that if you are under extreme stress, pressure, feeling anxiety, frustration, that amygdala is going to hijack you big time. And what they are going to remember, the behavior people are going to remember, is how you acted in those few moments. Not everything else you've done. They're not going to remember your great office. They're not going to remember your great title, but they're going to remember what you said or what you did when that amygdala hijacked you.
That is so powerful. It is true. We all know it.
Yeah.
We define other people not by their greater body of work, but it is the memories of these inordinate, kind of off rails behaviors that caused us to be off balance and not knowing, what's this mean? I don't know what to do with what just happened here.
Right.
So yeah, no, that's amazing. So we're talking about, again, the benefits and why leaders should be concerned with emotional intelligence. Let's hit that a little deeper. Do you have more to talk about that? And even what's it cost us? What's the cost if we don't develop this muscle?
Oh yeah, that's so great. I think, well, first of all, I think one of my lessons learned as a leader is that people remember how I treated them. That's what they remember.
Yeah.
They remember if I, sought their input, if I sought their opinions, if I wanted to, spend some time with them. And they're going to remember if I listened to what they had to say, because that brought value to them. So they're not going to remember me for giving them the raise. They're not going to remember me for, patting them on the back for a great project that they did. They're going to remember me for how I treated them. And they're going to remember me for how I treated them in good times as well as bad times.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what people remember. I will tell you myself, of the leaders in my life that I have had, the ones that have had the most significant impacts on me and that I remember very clearly, as though some of these situations happened yesterday, is how they treated me in certain situations.
Yeah. No, that is so true. I think of basketball coaches back in high school, and I had one who he loved me. He wanted to be a mentor. He was a young guy, and he would stretch me beyond what I was comfortable with. He would ride me so hard, but in game situations, we're down 1 point, and he would grab me by the collar and he'd say, "Pat, you're going to make this shot. You're going to take it. You're going to make it." And I remember one time I missed the shot, and then somehow we got the ball back. He grabbed me again and he said, "I'm not worried about the last shot." He said, "This time you're going to make it. You're going to listen. You will make it." And there was something in me due to that leadership that made me think, if nothing else happens on this planet for the rest of my life, I promise you, I will make that shot. And I made it. I made the shot.
Because one of the things he was doing is because he knew your self-confidence just got shaken when you missed it that first time.
You bet it did.
And now to put you back in there to do it again?
Yeah.
He had to build that back up.
And when he did do that, the confidence went beyond where it was before. And then here's the big takeaway as a leader, is that after that, my loyalty to him was built at a level that it had never been before.
Absolutely.
Because he did something that made trust explode. And that is exactly what, we're talking about. So again, is there any other things that we need to be concerned about when it comes to emotional intelligence?
Well, you had asked about the cost.
Yeah.
And I could do a laundry list of the cost of not tapping into emotional intelligence, because the relationships with people around you are going to be destroyed if you even have them at all.
Yeah.
As a leader, people are not going to want to follow you. And, you're not a leader if people aren't going to want to follow. I mean, leaders have to have followers. And so if no one wants to be around you, there's definitely a cost to having very low or no emotional intelligence. Influence. You're not going to be able to influence people. Emotional intelligence gives you the opportunity to be an influencer, because you care about people and you understand what needs to be done. And it's not just a matter of telling them what they do, but it's also seeking that input from them. That's that whole relationship piece, seeking that input from them. So it will be deadly costly if you fail to tap into emotional intelligence at any level. And you know what? You don't have to be an expert in emotional intelligence. If you just do a couple of things in emotional intelligence that you didn't do yesterday, it will make a huge difference for you in your relationships with those around you.
Oh, absolutely. And as a pastor, I can tell you that a lot of marriages have failed. It cost couples marriages. Sometimes I'm coming to mind of some guys who were what I would call clue bags around emotional connection. And they would be like, I don't know why she's upset with me. And she's been saying it for the last hour in my office. How do you not know, what is going on in your inability to connect with her? Again, those are costs. So it can cost dreams, careers, opportunities. And so sometimes you work extra hard. Some people will be like, I work so hard and I don't seem to advance very easy.
Yeah.
One of the first things you need to look at is your emotional intelligence muscles. When you look in the emotional intelligence mirror, are you developing guns? Are you growing? Because if all of your skill pieces seem to be you've worked really hard on them, then I wonder if it's the emotional intelligence component that is holding you back. Would you agree?
I would. And one of the things to do too is to look at those people around you that are in your life that you're attracted to, that you like to be around, that you like, that influence you, that you respect, that you honor. I guarantee you there are things about them that's high on the rank of emotional intelligence. That's what's attracting you to them. That's what's causing you to want to be around them. And that's what emotional intelligence does for us.
So let me just throw in on that, because this is a key piece of what I like to teach at Red Ink Revival around emotions, because in Christianity, sometimes emotions have been demonized. That if you're going to be spiritual, you're not going to have emotions. And that we live by faith and not by emotions. And there is nuances around that that's absolutely true. But faith itself has an emotional expression. Faith itself is an emotion that moves you to activate on God's word, to be loyal to it, and to say, I'm going to live by it. That is an emotional compulsion to even live that way. So when I think of when Christians will say, so-and-so is such a spiritual person, the most spiritual person I ever met in my life, I always want to know, describe some of the things you think of when you think of them as this giant of spirituality. And it's always emotional stuff.
Oh, yeah. I would not be surprised at all, because that's what attracts us to them.
Yes. Yeah. Peace, joy, love, kindness, goodness. All of that is actually, when you drill down on every one of them, they're very patient. Well, why are they patient? You drill down and it's always got an emotional underpinning. And so, I think that that's amazing. So let's hit this first domain of self-awareness, and let's dig further into it. Why is it such a key component to emotional intelligence?
Yeah, self-awareness is the section that you're talking about. And, self-awareness really goes hand in hand with self-development.
Oh, come on.
You can't develop if you don't know what you need to develop.
Yeah.
So the two go hand in hand, and it requires, when you're doing that self-assessment, it requires that you are able to identify both your strengths and, yes, your weaknesses.
Yeah.
Because we all have them,
yes.
and of course we want to leverage our strengths. They are there for us. They are God-given gifts, and we want to absolutely use them to the fullest, right? But that doesn't mean that just because we have a weakness that God hasn't given us the gift to develop it, because he has.
Oh, come on.
But we just have to go about finding out how to do it and who to go to help us with it. And again, that's why God has given people in our lives, is for them to guide us and to mentor us and to coach us in order to develop these weaknesses.
Yeah.
You know, when Jesus picked his disciples, they didn't all know what in the world they were supposed to be doing, but he coached them, he mentored them, and he saw, you know, how many times did we hear, I can't do that, Jesus? And he said, yes, you can. And he coached them through it,
Yeah.
you know, and that's exactly what we're doing here. You know, but the other thing too is don't be judgmental on yourself when you are doing that self-examination, because again, if you are saying, oh my gosh, you know, I have this weakness and this weakness, and you know, and you're judging yourself for that, two things can happen. One, you either, you know, succumb, you kind of become paralyzed and say, I don't even know where to start and how to fix this, you know, so I'm doomed. Well, no, you're not. But the other thing is, when you are judging yourself for the weakness, is I think you sometimes have a tendency to think good and bad, that, you know, I must be bad because I have these weaknesses. So again, you are classifying yourself, you're putting a label on yourself that's not fair and does not belong.
Yeah.
Bad means that the apple tastes bad,
Yeah.
you know, or the apple went bad. You didn't go bad.
Yeah.
You're not a bad person.
That's
You
right.
have a weakness that you need to develop. But what's important is that you know you have both. There are people walking this earth that do not believe they have any weaknesses.
And if you're not Jesus, you're wrong.
That's right. That's right. But those are the fun people to coach.
Yeah, right. Right. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. You know what your weakness is the fact that you don't think you have any weaknesses.
That's exactly.
So
Yeah.
let's talk about that. So yeah, so it really is that component is that emotional self-awareness. So it really goes hand in hand with self-development, and you need to do that honest assessment. And again, though, there are some tools that I've used in workshops that help people to you know, kind of glean some of this out for themselves, but also seeking some of the feedback from people around them that they trust. Those relationships, we've talked a lot about feedback already, you know, can help in determining. And, you know, if you are, you know, if you have a significant other in your life, they will absolutely give you.
They've already given you the feedback.
Oh yeah. There's no filter in their feedback that they give us. So yeah.
Yeah, your spouse and your kids.
Oh
will
yeah.
give you the best feedback. And truthfully, you know that with your kids, weaknesses in your personality are already showing up in them. And that's why they trigger you.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
You know, when it comes to self-awareness, something that I've learned that is very helpful is looking at my body, my physical body, as a reflector or a gauge. So whenever I am emotionally getting flooded, the first place it's going to show up is in my body. And it will show up for me, my cheeks begin to have a rush of blood and I feel heat in my cheeks.
Interesting.
Some people, it's the tightening of their shoulders or their neck. Other people can feel things like their heart beating very fast. And I typically can pick up on that as well. So if you will just simply begin tuning into your body, whenever you start feeling flooded and be like, oh, something's happening in me, there's neurochemicals washing over my brain. And note that when a neurochemical's washing over your brain, you're going to have to move the levers around to regulate it. Yeah. So an example of that is that if you're in an amygdala hijack where fear and panic has captured you, you can't just change with a decision. What you have to, in terms of, I'm not going to panic. Okay, just calm. That's not going to fix it. No. What you have to do is correlate other neurochemicals. You have to move levers around in your brain activated by the way you are thinking and what you are desiring to feel. So as an example, when panic is going on, if you'll turn and feel the love of God to you, if you will learn to activate that empathy is coming from God in that moment, compassion is coming from God, and then feel that yourself. And ultimately, if you can abdicate control of the moment, if you can just internally say, I'm going to abdicate the control, what it'll do is it'll allow other neurochemicals like oxytocin that will calm the cortisol release of the fight, flight, freeze that has you in panic. and then you'll begin to re-regulate. Some of the things that is helpful to me is if I feel like I'm getting in panic, and this can just be in a conversation like with my wife, where she is giving me feedback or she's saying something that is going in a direction where panic is telling me, based on a lifetime of scans and mapping, that I'm not safe, that this is not going to go well in terms of where this decision is headed. If I can stop in that moment and abdicate the control element is what is firing up my anxiety. And so if I can abdicate control, which the beautiful thing for Christians are, we abdicate it to God.
Right.
And we say, Jesus, you are Lord, your word's true, and I'm just going to enter into trust in that moment. That will calm you back down. When you put your feet on the ground in an environment where you're in panic, when you put your feet on the ground, we call it grounding. It grounds you so that you can tune in to what's happening to your body. And your body's only doing what it's doing because you're having an emotional reaction. And so then you tune into those emotions. Over time, you develop that until you're practicing what is the emotion, what's the narrative behind that emotion that's driving it, and is it true? Is that narrative true? And when you get to the root of that narrative, because sometimes the narrative isn't so obvious, but if you ask, so what does that mean to me, whatever that narrative is, what does that mean to me? And you keep moving down to what does that sub-narrative mean to me? Then what does that sub-narrative mean to me? You'll always get down to the root fear, and then you can apply truth to it. Rational truth and revelation truth, which is biblical truth. But yes, go ahead, Joyce.
Well, I was just going to say, but I'm going to take everything you just said, and I want to put it in 2 words for people.
Do it.
Practice mindfulness.
Let's talk about that.
Okay.
Great 2 words. Those are the takeaway words. I love it.
Those are the takeaway words, right? Because, for me too, when I can have a quick concept that I can kind of latch onto, then it will take me back to everything that you were just describing or someone else just described. If I, I've got some quick triggers, if you will. Mindfulness is where you focus your attention on what's going on right now, on the moment that you're in, and how are you responding? What are you feeling? Okay, and why did you respond that way? That's everything you said it so eloquently, but that is everything you just said is practice mindfulness. Yeah. Focus your attention on what's happening to you right now, what you said, what you did. Why did you respond that way? And then you can and because at that moment, you may not be able to take it to that deeper level yet because you have to respond because you're in the situation, but then you can come back to that. And you can say, okay, now I need to go deeper to say, why did that trigger me? Why did that cause me to respond that way? And then we can start pulling up the other pieces that you were so eloquently also talking about. So practice mindfulness.
Yes. And theologically, we know that the scripture says in the last days, which we all would believe that we're living in the last days. Fundamentally, from Acts chapter 2 all the way to today, we're in the last days. We're in the last of the last days. And there is a prophetic word that the love of many would wax cold because of all the chaos. Well, now on a neurobiological level, what's that even mean? What that means is that people will be so practiced in stress, chaos, and fear, panic, that they will have exercised that to such a degree that they do not exercise the parts of their brain where love, mercy, empathy, and compassion are because they don't exercise. It's not a strengthened thing. So what's interesting is so many people think emotions happen to us. And what we know is that emotions happen with us.
Yeah.
And just like you walk into a dark room, flip the switch on, you can move your thoughts, which are neurons firing with neurons. They will release neurochemicals. So you can actually trigger experiences of emotions. So if I were to say, let's all stop for a moment and let's just shut our eyes and let's imagine what it feels like to be loved. Not conceptualize what it's like to be loved, but feel it. What does the feeling feel like? So you may have to go through some concepts to derive the feeling from that. You have to go through some memories or think of something that's pleasurable to you. And it's like, oh, that makes me feel loved, and the feeling. So what's that feel like? As you exercise that, the muscle gets developed so that you ultimately, on demand, can go to that place and feel oxytocin being released, calming the cortisol so that your love is never waxing cold in life. And where you're feeling joy and peace. So you practice joy. What's joy feel like? You derive or extract the feeling itself, and then you learn to sit in it and you feel it. And the whole moment or the whole session is to experience the feelings of the neurochemicals that give you that emotion. And as you do it, you then can, as you're talking about, develop the muscles of emotional intelligence so that when you're at a board meeting or you are making decisions in your family, you're able to regulate based on the muscles that you have developed. Isn't that a cool example?
That's an absolutely great example. I love it. And I'm probably going to steal that from you. So when I steal something like that, I give you credit like the first couple of times I use it. And then after that, I completely own it. So
I would feel really bad about that. But because I steal everything you say and do, turnabout's fair play, right?
That's good. That's good. But another thing though too that has also helped me to increase my self-awareness is journaling.
Oh, see, I love that.
And I used to be the old, pen and paper journal person, and until computers came along, and now I have a couple of files, and so I capture things there. But don't think that there aren't times that I just jot something down real quick. So if I happen to be somewhere and I'm feeling something or I'm experiencing something and I don't have that opportunity to pull out my computer and pull up my file, I'll grab my paper and pull my pen out and capture it, but then I move it over, to my journal. I love journaling because I think the piece of journaling that I love the most is going back to read my historical entries to see where was I 6 months ago, a year ago, 2 years ago, and compare that to where I am today, which also tells me, have I experienced growth? Because if I go back and read my historical entries and I find out that I'm still today where I was 2 years ago, then I haven't done much in the way of growth and change. But and so I love to read the historical entries. And years ago, when I was at Sprint, one of the things that we offered there was Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. And I actually facilitated that course, had the great opportunity to meet him a couple of times. He was an absolutely wonderful, wonderful man.
Wow.
And one of the things that we did was there was various things that as you went through the course, initially you would write things down. You would write goals down, or you would write changes that you would want to make. Now, mind you, this is from like 20 years ago, maybe even longer. No, 20 years ago. And I pull that out now and I read it. And it's just so much fun to read what I wrote that I wanted to do, or that I was aspiring to do, or I wanted to work on. And so journaling is not just a place to capture those thoughts and feelings and emotions that you've experienced, but to see where you've been and where you are today.
Yeah.
So if you're not sure if you're growing, journaling will tell you if you are.
Let me go on a little riff here that is just so fascinating to me when I know why our brains do what they do. And so on the note of journaling, this is something that I recently have understood in a different way, is that when we journal, first of all, the amygdala is where our files of traumatic emotions get put away. The long-term context of that's in the hippocampus, but the amygdala, when a baby is born, it primarily is matured. It comes out to feel, to experience. The emotions are locked in the amygdala at birth, primarily.
Right.
The hippocampus does it where context is understood. It doesn't actually get developed till around age 15. The language centers, we already know babies don't even talk for a few years, so the language centers aren't even developed. And so often we have experiences that happen in our lives where the emotion of trauma, grief, rejection, betrayal, all that stuff happens in our amygdala and it gets locked away. We have some context of it in the hippocampus, but our brains don't know how to make sense of it.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex, you were talking about the visual cortex last time. The prefrontal cortex is where our rational cognitive thoughts are. It's what makes sense intellectually of the happenings of our lives. And the prefrontal cortex doesn't develop till you're like 25. That's why teenagers are sometimes crazy. But 25. So here's the thing about journaling that I love. You can have a wound, a grief, a loss, or you can be in a board meeting scenario, you can be in a leadership environment and panic come up in you. If you will go to journal it, what happens is the prefrontal cortex, the rational cognitive part of your brain, begins to fire with neurons into the amygdala, and the prefrontal cortex, by writing, begins to extrapolate out that wound, that loss, that fear, that panic, and it begins to make meaning to it where it loses its power or the energy that typically causes you to fight, flight, freeze. So journaling is the gift that we have to be able to pull over our cognitive thinking, our intellectual thoughts that we often don't live by, and it begins to process out the emotional hyper reactions. Isn't that interesting?
That is so good. I love that. That is so, so true. So
All I
good.
got to say is thank you, Dr. Todd Bobin. He was the one who told me that. I love it. Is
So
there
good.
anything else that you can do to increase, or that you've done? Journaling's one of them. Is there anything else that you want to drop on that?
Yeah, as far as self-awareness, I think the other thing that I've done is meditation. Now, I'm not talking about, doing sitting lotus style and all that kind of thing,
Right?
but just spending, that alone time. Of course, I know I'm not alone because God is always with me, but spending that time away from the busyness of the day, away from the distractions of others, away from the distractions of everything that's going on in the world, turning off the TV, turning off everything, and just spending that time with me
Yeah.
and God, because that's usually where I also listen, or I should say, that's also where I typically hear his answers.
So good.
Is when I'm spending that time, and I've removed every other distraction, because I think what happens is if we're trying to listen for his answer in other circumstances, it gets too messed up in all the noise of the day, and we can't hear it.
So good.
So
So
yeah,
good.
I think meditation is a strong thing for me when it comes to self-awareness.
And it sounds like a biblical thing. I'm pretty sure that is throughout the entire Bible. It's like God knew that Joyce and Patrick would need that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Thank you, God.
Well, let's hit self-management. What as one of the domains of emotional intelligence, what all is included in self-management?
Well, one of the things is the self-control. And this is a skill that can be practiced. It can be strengthened. So don't let anyone fool you and say, you're an impulsive person. You were born that way. You'll always be that way. Wrong. I absolutely disagree with that statement. It is something that you can practice. And go back to your point that you made earlier about the teens don't mature in certain pieces of their brain until they're young adults until they're 25. Well, that's part of this whole self-control. It is that maturity that's occurring within us, even internally and physically. It's not just all mentally and emotionally, but it's also the physical side of us. But the thing is having that ability to self-control, and that means I know we've heard this term a lot, but it means biting your tongue.
Yeah.
Stop and hold back. And I can tell you, remember, I think in part one, I mentioned how if I thought it, I said it.
Yeah, right.
I had no self-control, but now I do. And there have been times that I've been in conversations with people and I can feel myself wanting to say something. And I realize that that's not going to be helpful to the relationship. It's not going to be helpful to the person who's speaking to me. So there's no need to be saying it. But it has been developed over time, which gives me that self-control. Because if we don't have it, we will always say things we regret.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
And once it's out there, it's out there.
Yeah. And then you
It's
got
out
to
there.
clean up. And clean
That's
up
right.
takes time. energy, distraction. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
that's right. It's interesting because self-control emphasizes that the only thing you legitimately can control is you.
Yeah.
And yet our attempt is to control our organizations, control people, control outcomes, and you can't control any of that. It's an illusion. But you
Right.
can control you, and controlling you is not just about the end game or at the surface. Controlling you means you do the work on the energy systems that drive you to do unwanted things, and how do you reprocess that. So I love that we're talking about emotional intelligence by first being self-aware and
Mhm.
then moving to self-control or managing the self.
Right.
uh, is there any other examples that you can give, even positive impacts that good self-management or self-control provides?
Yeah, well, I can think of a particular example that I had with a direct report on a positive self-management. I actually can give you one of each because I think it's important for us to hear both a positive as well as a negative. Um, but I had a direct report who came to me and asked me to make a major exception around an upcoming commitment that she had. And initially, I could see no way around it. I could see no way to be able to make this exception she was asking for. And so I told her at that time that I, didn't see the ability to make the exception and wasn't sure I could grant it. Well, she had decided then that it was time to attack me verbally. So she decided that it was time to attack my leadership style verbally since she wasn't getting what she needed. Now, if I had no self-control and I was being attacked and my amygdala was going to determine and potentially hijack me, then I could have really sniped back at her.
Mm.
But because I've been able to develop my self-control over time, I was able to maintain, bite my tongue, if you will, even though the blood was beginning to simmer a little bit. I could feel that the level of my blood boiling, and told her that I would take some time to consider her request and get back with her to see if there was something we could do. Wasn't even sure that it could happen. Well, I did take some time to reflect on what she asked about, and I actually did come up with a workaround on what we could do. And so when I met with her, so that's another piece of the self-management is adaptability.
Mm.
So self-control, not saying what I wanted to say when she attacked me during the initial meeting, but then walking away. And by the way, that's a good way to also take an assessment of what's happening is if you have the opportunity to walk away from the situation, reflect and come back to it, which is what
Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
And I saw I didn't have to be rigid in my thinking. So I also exhibited adaptability, which is a part of self-management. And when I met with her, I told her that I thought that I had a solution that would benefit her as well as benefiting the organization. So I was able to provide some of that optimism, if you will, which is also a part of self-management. And as it turns out, she accepted my alternative approach to it, and everything went off without a hitch.
Wow.
But it
Wow.
was all about self-control,
Yeah.
adaptability, and then also, being optimistic in how I saw the solution to be, and everything went well after that.
That's so good. I love it. So we've hit on self-awareness. We've hit on self-management. Let's talk about social awareness. What's up with
Okay.
that?
Yeah, social awareness is all about empathy. And oh, I've got to tell you, man, empathy is one of my soapboxes. I teach listening skills, and a big part of teaching listening is empathic listening. But
Mm.
here's something that's really interesting that I have found out. Um, there are studies that tell us, even though the word empathy comes from a Greek word, I think it's empathia, and I don't speak Greek, so I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, which means feeling into. So that's kind of the definition behind that.
Yeah.
Empathy actually can be traced back to infancy.
Mm.
Babies, on the day they are born, have the empathic skills within them.
It's interesting.
Because when they sense or hear another baby crying, or they sense another baby, and one baby senses another baby upset, they take on that same emotion. And proof of that
Yeah.
is if you've ever seen any kind of example of a nursery with a lot of babies.
Yeah.
And when one baby cries,
They all cry.
all of a sudden they're all going to start to cry. In daycare, if a child has hurt themselves and starts to cry and he's in one corner of the room, and there's a child in another corner of the room and from across the room can see the tears, will often tear up themselves because of their natural instinct for empathy.
Well, that's so true.
You know, we've had it from birth.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is so amazing, which means that we've been shoving it down all of our life.
Oh, yeah. That's so
Yeah.
good. You see it even with, 4 or 5-year-old kids watching Disney cartoons, and something goes bad for one of the characters and they just sit there and cry. And which is empathy. It's the ability to feel what somebody else is experiencing.
Right.
I think empathy is one of, as you're describing, the biggest, most important skills that we have, but it's one of the most it's a lost skill. It is an underdeveloped skill. I can say for usually if I am talking to a family and the teenage son is not cooperating with the family values or not moving in the direction like the dad wants, often the dad thinks that his role is to power up. His role is to control. His role is to reinforce or to teach or to fix. And really all that teenage boy needs is somebody to feel, see, and know him in that moment. It's the Dan Siegel whole mindset around the attachment order and how this child, this teenager, is just needing to be felt internally, and that's empathy.
Because when you have expressed how they feel, they really feel heard and listened to.
Yeah.
That's a moment where you don't have to say, I hear you. You don't have to say, I'm listening to what you have to say. All you have to do is express those feelings that they're emoting to you, those emotions that they're emoting to you, and they will know that you've listened, that you've heard them, that they're seen.
Yeah. And it, again, the way the brain works, it calms their fight, flight, freeze.
Yes, it does.
They don't even know that it's happening.
No,
they
that's
just
right.
know the experience of it.
That's right.
I think of multiple stories of, like, even one kid and his brother were talking to grandparents. Mom's in the other room. They're on the phone. And all of a sudden, one of the boys, the older boy, comes running in and says, little Johnny just hit me with his fist in front of the grandparents. Well, mom, who is a child psychologist, she is instinctively in panic to control this. She goes in and then she begins to engage her empathic tools, and she says to the little boy who hit, said, I heard that you hit your brother. And he said he did, gritted his teeth, and he's just angry. And so she has an option there. Do I control this and fix it right now, or do I feel into him? And she said, well, honey, this is not like you. Why did you hit your brother? And then he tells that I was telling a joke to Grandma and Grandpa, and my older brother jumped in and stole my joke. And he felt powerless. He felt victimized. And she says, honey, that is so hard. That is so harsh. I know what it's like when somebody steals my punchline. And honey, I'm so sorry that happened to you. And he immediately begins to calm and regulate. And he doesn't even know why. His brain's getting chemicals there that are helping him regulate. And then she says, after she's calmed him, hugs him, holds him, then she says, honey, we can't hit our brothers. That's not okay. And he said, I know, Mom. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. That would not have been an I'm so sorry if empathy hadn't shown up first.
That's right.
It would have been justification. It would have been preservation, survival. It would have been, what do I have to do to prove the hurt that he gave me?
That's right.
Isn't that interesting?
Right. Very interesting. And there's one of those wounds that we carry with us the rest of our life if it's not resolved.
Yes. Yes.
is that then when we feel like where someone is taking something from us, we're going to react that same way as we reacted, as the 6-year-old or however old he was reacted.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And our culture is so not predisposed to empathy that
No.
there's multiple times that I'll see somebody in a painful moment and I'll say to them, gosh, I am so sorry that happened to you. And they'll come back with, and they don't even think, they just fire it back at me. Oh, no, don't be sorry. Don't be sorry. And I correct it in that moment. And I'll say, no. I'm connecting with you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm loving you in your story. So my sorry is not where somehow I'm just giving sympathy and I want to move along. I want you to know I see you. But I'm telling you, the percentage of people, their instinct is to avoid contact around empathy.
Yes.
And so it's important that we say, look, you know, I want you to feel loved. That's what I'm doing here. I'm not just trying to carry the I am sorry.
Right.
So some people feel like it's a weakness to show empathy. So talk about that just a little bit.
You know what? That is so untrue. To me, not showing empathy is the weakness.
Yes.
You know, for so long, I think there must have been 2 or 3 years of, I remember in corporate America, people were saying, you know, don't say you're sorry. That's a sign of weakness. I beg to differ. To me, saying you're sorry or showing empathy is actually, I think, a sign of strength. Because one, if you're saying you're sorry, you're taking responsibility for whatever it was you did or said.
Yes.
And that takes strength, that takes courage. And once you do that, the other person has now felt as though they have been validated, and they'll take the time to have a conversation with you.
Yeah.
So I just think that showing empathy is an absolute strength, but it has to be developed. People have to understand what that looks like, what that sounds like, because it is taking that example that you gave, you know, I am so sorry with what you've experienced, or, you know, however you would finish that statement. But we would take that statement and say, I am so sorry for what you're going through. You sound as though you're very disappointed in what happened.
That's beautiful.
And see, the word disappointment now is beginning to key into the emotions that they're feeling.
Yeah.
So you add those emotional words, if you will.
Yeah.
And that's where we're showing empathy and exhibiting empathy to people.
I know one of the things that I watch when somebody is crying, particularly in a process group where I have people who are doing work on themselves, and somebody gets ready to tell a story, or a husband or a wife are sitting there and one of them begins to emote, you know, tears are getting in their eyes. Mm-hmm. The instinct in our human weakness, the instinct is to turn away from that, or to speed up, or to shut it down. And what empathy does is, and I love doing this, is whenever I see them getting ready to cry, slow down and call it out and say, I'm noticing there's a lot of emotion right there. Mm-hmm. Tell me what that is. What are you feeling right now?
Yeah, absolutely. Or something that was just said has tapped into something that's disturbing you.
Go ahead. Follow the emotional trail. Yes.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think what happens too is that, you know, how many times, and I've said it myself, when I start to cry, if I'm in an interaction with someone and I start to cry, I'm sorry to be crying.
Right.
Why do we apologize for crying? I don't get it.
Right. I don't either. I don't either.
But I've said it myself. I've done it myself.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I stand in the pulpit, and if I get a surge to want to cry, immediately the grief protests and says, don't cry. Don't cry.
That's right.
And it's like, why wouldn't I? Who cares?
Exactly. It's an emotion. We're humans. Jesus cried. Why can't we cry?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel, if somebody will cry in front of you and they're not shamed by it internally, then you feel invited into their pain, which is a great intimate gift.
I agree. Well,
let's talk about organizational awareness. How does organizational awareness impact the whole success of people? in the workplace?
Yeah, well, because of the ability of people with that higher level of emotional intelligence to be able to identify what I call power relationships,
Mm,
you're able to develop networks that you need in the organization because, again, as a leader, you can't do it all yourself. You need to have people around you. And you can't do everything well. You have strengths, you have weaknesses, so you should be, putting people around you that offset your weaknesses. So you find out who those individuals are, you build those power networks, you identify them, and then when you need to have something done, when you need to bring people together to collaborate on something or solve a problem, they're going you're going to know who to point out to, who to grab onto to be able to bring into that fold, if you will. But also if you're helping someone to choose a mentor, if you have a direct report, for example, who is looking for a mentor, and so maybe they come to you as their leader and say, I'm looking for a mentor to help me develop XYZ. Well, if you have this power network because of your organizational awareness, then you can point them in the direction of one of those power relationships and say, you know what, I think you need to be talking to so-and-so. And so
That's
you're able to connect them. Yes. Yeah.
That's so good. So let's back up. We started out with self-awareness, which is a domain, self-management. Then we went to social awareness. Now we're dealing with organizational awareness. Are those all 4 domains?
Well, social awareness has organizational awareness under it. It's a subcomponent.
Okay, I got
Yeah. So organizational, because social awareness has empathy and organizational awareness subcomponents.
I got you. That
Okay.
makes sense.
So then our 4th domain
Yep.
is the relationship management.
And what's that all about?
Yeah, that goes into, dealing with conflict and being able to manage, resolve conflict. And, it doesn't mean that you avoid it, because conflict is conflict and conflict is rich. Conflict often provides us with some great outcomes, but knowing how to deal with it. And if you're high in those level of self-awareness and self-management and organizational or social awareness, being able to deal with conflict is going to be a lot easier for you.
Wow.
And I say a lot easier. Dealing with conflict is never easy, but it won't be as tasking, if you will. And you won't be exhausted at the end of the day and having to deal with it. So, and also coaching and mentoring is a part of that relationship management, which is a little bit of what I alluded to in your organizational awareness. If someone's coming to you for that mentorship, you're able then to point them in the direction of someone who might be able to provide them with that.
Yeah.
And just being an inspirational leader. An inspirational leader gets people to want to do what the leader is asking of them to do. And they do it because they want to, not because they have to.
Yeah.
And they do it because they're inspired by the leadership that's in front of them. And that's so very, very key. But you do that by building the relationship with the people that you have.
Which could only happen if you have self-awareness.
Right.
And then you move all the way up the food chain of our domains here.
That's right.
And it's interesting that when you have, as an example, empathy, and you've developed a pattern of predictability with the people that are in your organization or around you, whether it's your family or friend environments, wherever it's at, if there's empathy there, there's trust. Where there's trust, there is loyalty, and loyalty will always cause people to go an extra mile in inspiration with what you're doing. I think it's interesting how you've laid all of this out. Well, if somebody wanted to grow and know more about emotional intelligence, what kind of recommendations would you give to help them, strengthen in these areas?
Yeah, well, I would absolutely encourage them to pick up some of Daniel Goleman's books.
Yeah.
They're not written so textbooky that they're hard to understand. So absolutely some good books that he provides. And he provides a lot of rich research and history behind the information that he shares too. But then also, participate, perhaps if you really want to dig down into it, participate in some sort of workshop around emotional intelligence that will take you through some tools and some practice on some of these concepts. Because remember, these are soft skills. And one of the things we talked about on soft skills is you can't develop them just by reading about them in a book. You have to put them into practice, and you have to seek feedback for how you're using them. So workshops is a great place to kind of stick your toe in the water and try some things on for size, if you will. And then seek someone out to be a potential mentor for you. Who is someone that you believe exhibits some of these characteristics, these domains that we've described in emotional intelligence? And if there's someone that you can identify, reach out to them and tell them that you want to develop in that arena, and ask them to be your mentor and be your guide. So those would probably be a couple of, very quick things that I would suggest that they do to try to go much deeper and to really be able to develop that muscle of emotional intelligence within them.
And you and I have talked about the development of a 5-hour or a couple of courses that each would be 5 hours that Red Ink Revival will offer and make available. And so it's a university level course that would really make a big difference in people wanting to grow. Joyce, so appreciate you. You know how Tina and I love you, and we're grateful for every time we get to spend together. And if somebody wanted to get a hold of you, how would they do that?
My email address would Joy Hill, even though my first name is Joyce. It's joyhill621@gmail.com.
Awesome. Well, thank you again. Look forward to another one of these real soon.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us today. You might be wondering what's next. Well, consider attending one of our special online events at Red Ink Revival. Also, subscribe to this podcast at any podcast provider and on YouTube. Go to redinkrrevival.com to find out all the unique opportunities to grow your life and leadership. While you're there, sign up for our e-newsletter that'll hit your inbox the first of each month with a powerful blog post. Everything we're building is to resource you to be a wholehearted leader. I'd love for you to be a part of our tribe. I can't wait till our next episode, and I'm glad that you're with us today. We'll see you next time.